Okay, probably the number one question I get every week, and I get lots of them in my inbox, is Mark, I've got this piece of equipment, yada, yada, yada. Could you help me by repairing it? And inevitably, I've got this little canned response email I'll flash up here that I send back to them. And I basically say, hey, I'm no longer taking in customer gear. I'm a busy day job, and then I'm making these YouTube videos, and I've got lots of gear of my own. Da, da, da. I'm just not really focused on customer gear. I've got a queue backed up over a year long, so on and so forth. And inevitably, I get a response back after I send that email saying, I understand your situation, Mark, but could you help me find an amp tech? And so I thought I'd make a video today on one, how to find a good amp tech, but just as important, how to keep a good amp tech or electronics technician, audio tech, whatever you want to call them. How to find one, how to keep one. Both are very important. So grab some popcorn, grab a drink. This might be a long one. All right, I'm going to give a warning that the things I'm about to share with you are purely my opinion. Take them for what they're worth. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm just saying they're my opinion. All right, onward. I did some searching on my own. I hit all over the state of North Carolina. I hit Google. I hit Craigslist. I hit Facebook groups. I hit a lot of different places. And I was just searching, hey, I need somebody to fix a piece of gear of mine. I put myself in those shoes. Here's what I found. I found TV repair shops, and it's not like the TV repair shops you used to find. These are guys that just now are recapping more modern LCD type TVs, and that's all they do is kind of a recap of those things. So let's mark those off the list. Then I found shops that do, they'll be titled electronics repair, but when you look into them a little bit, they do phones, they do iPad screens, they do Xboxes, they do PS4s. They basically do, modern electronic components like you would buy at Best Buy. We mark those off the list. They're not going to be fixing your Marantz 2270. Next up, I found some car audio guys. They do professional installation, and a few of them will do some repair of audio amplifiers and whatnot. Not going to be working on your Marantz 2270. Let's mark them off the list. Then I found a little bit broader list of guys that repair musical gear. Maybe keyboards, maybe guitar amps, things of that nature. And that list was a little bit bigger, but there again, when you kind of read into what they do, read the reviews and whatnot, they're not the guy that's going to be working on your Macintosh 225. So cross them off the list. So what's missing from what I found out here online? There were no stereo technicians, no tube gear technicians. I just didn't see it. I did find a place or two that specialized in high-end audio video, and they claim to do repairs at a pretty astronomical rate, but then when you start reading their reviews, they really don't mess with a lot of vintage gear. It's mostly newer stuff. So that kind of leaves you wondering, well, where do I take my vintage audio gear to, right? And you might could try one of those things I mentioned above, maybe talk them into giving a try at your unit. But I've seen that path before too. You take your gear to them, it sits on the shelf for 8 months. You finally press on them, and they finally say, it's really just not our wheelhouse, and they give you your gear back, and you wasted a lot of time. Next option you have is to find what I would kind of call a pseudo tech. Maybe it's somebody that's got an electrical engineering background, or maybe somebody that's done some of this stuff for in their day job, but they've really never worked on audio gear. So they're like, well, I could give it a try, or I could see what I could figure out, maybe what's wrong with it. And that's not a bad route if you trust the individual, but they probably don't have a lot of practical experience working with your audio gear. The next thing you might find is somebody like myself. They do a lot of this stuff, but they just don't have time to deal with customer gear, on an ongoing basis, or when they do, it's in very limited quantities. So, they may have a long queue, or they may, just take in a few pieces here, there, and yonder. So that leaves you kind of wanting as well. Or you go find a really good shop, okay? And there are some of them out there, don't get me wrong. I know a guy down in Texas, Terry DeWick, does a lot of the Macintosh stuff. I know a guy in Tennessee that's pretty good, but there again, his queue's backed up really, really long time. But there are some of these guys out there. The problem is they are as scarce as hen's teeth at this point in time. The age of the average electronic tech, amp tech, whatever, it's getting up there, and they're retiring, they're dying off. There's not a lot of new people getting into this hobby, so it's harder and harder to find. You find a lot of people getting into it as a hobby to work on their own gear, maybe because they can't find a tech, but you don't find a lot of people that are getting into it and then opening up a shop. And there's probably a reason for that. It's a little known secret in the industry. You can barely make a living at this stuff. If I quit my day job today and wanted to do electronics repair for a living, it would significantly, to the tune of probably 4 or 5x, reduce my standard of living. All of my disposable income would go away. All the cool tools and toys that I buy up here would not be happening. Because if you think about it, let's just say you're charging $40, $50, $60, $70, $80 an hour to do this stuff. Well, I can tell you, when I work on someone's gear and I charge them $45 an hour, I'll end up charging them about 2 or 3 hours worth of labor, typically $90 to $150 worth of labor on whatever they're restoring. But I might have put in 6, 8, or 10 hours into that restoration. The reality, though, is they brought me a $400 piece of equipment. I can't charge them $700 in labor for this $400 worth of equipment. So I'm basically subsidizing the work that I do. And at the end of the day, you typically end up working for a whole lot less than that. And if you tried to charge the full rate for the full amount of time you put into a lot of these restorations, nobody would do it. All right, now that you understand why it's so hard to find an amp tech, let's talk a little bit about how you might find one. So one of the first things I recommend to people is to go onto Audio Karma or DIY Audio, any of the audio groups. Go find the section for the piece of gear you've got. Let's say you've got a Marantz piece of gear. Go find the Marantz section. Post in that section, hey, I live in North Carolina, or hey, I live in Virginia, or wherever. I'm looking for somebody to help me repair my Marantz unit. And you'll likely get some responses. It's the number one way I would go about finding one. Use some of these audio groups because you're hanging out with other audio people that have probably had stuff repaired themselves. Second one, join some of these Facebook groups. There's tons of them. I know a lot of you guys are not social media friendly and don't care about it. I'm not a big fan myself, but I still hang out on Facebook mainly because of the hobby and enthusiast groups that are out on there. And so go check out. There's tons of hi-fi groups out there on there. Go post and you'll get some responses, I promise. Next one, go around to your local record shops and ask them, hey, do you know anybody that repairs gear in the area? They probably hear this conversation a lot. They might would have some clues for you. It's one of those things, a lot of times you might end up, depending on what kind of gear you've got that you're needing repairing, you may end up having to ship it to somebody, depending on, whether it's kind of specialty or not or whatnot. And if you're not willing to ship, you may have to wait in a queue, if that makes sense. And if all that fails, shoot me an email. I'll see if I can try to help you out. I'll do my best. All right, so you found a good amp tech. Woohoo! I'm happy for you. And you take your gear to them, and they work on it for you, right? How that experience goes both ways for you and for them will determine if they're your amp tech in the future. And I keep using the word amp tech generically. It could just be electronics tech, could be guitar tech, could be audio engineer, whatever you want to call them. But treat your amp tech with some respect. Don't take them for granted. We've already talked about how hard they are to find. Just think about it. If you had a reel-to-reel unit and you wanted to find somebody to repair it, I only know of a handful. I mean, like 3 or 4 people in the whole country here in the U.S. that's doing that these days, okay? And they're probably going to be less over time, not more of those, okay? So just don't take them for granted. I'm telling you, do your best to treat the situation as it is. Treat them with respect. All right, next up, don't be pushy. And I got to give you a couple examples of what I mean by that. So you wait in this long queue. You finally get the amp tech reaches out to you, says, "I'm ready to work on your gear." You take it to them, and then 2 weeks later, you're calling them up saying, "Hey, have you got my gear done yet? I'm really excited about it. I really want this thing," right? Might not happen. It might be 2 months. It might be 3 months. It might be 4 months. It might be 6 months. These guys fit this stuff in. They may be working on 5 or 6 things at a time. They may be waiting on parts for yours. There's a lot of reasons these things take a while. Don't expect a week or two turnaround on your gear. When it starts getting 6 months to a year or whatnot, unless somebody's warned you ahead of time, that's getting pretty lengthy. But I'll tell people, if you're not in a hurry, I'm okay with working on something for you. But that not in a hurry might be 6 months or a year. If you're wanting somebody to fix it in the next 2-3 weeks, I'm not your guy, kind of thing. Second part of don't be pushy. I see this scenario all the time, and it's a little pet peeve of mine. But somebody brings me a piece of gear, I work on it for them. Okay. Then I fix it, and I call them and I tell them to come get it, and they come to pick it up. And what do? Oh yeah, they bring another piece of gear with them. So they take one piece of gear away from you, and they said, "Hey, now that you got that one done, I'd like for you to take a look at this." Well, wait a minute. I've got a year-long queue. You didn't put that piece of gear into the queue. You might have to wait another 6 months, 3 months, whatever the tech's queue length is, to get this other piece of gear in the queue. I think there's this implied thing that since you've got a face-to-face contact with this individual now, you kind of got them held captive. And when you're picking up one piece of gear, you'll throw another one in their lap to work on. I've seen it over and over and over again. I'm a nice guy. I try to be nice to people. I try to say, okay, I'll go ahead and take it to save you the trip next time. But ultimately, I feel a little bit taken advantage of. So I'm just telling you, don't do that to your amp tech. If you've got 2 pieces of gear you need repaired, get them both in the queue. Don't assume you can kind of one after another. I've had people bring me one, drop off another, I fix it, they pick it up, they drop off 2 others, and that series goes on. And next thing I know, they're dominating all my time. And I'm trying to be a nice guy, and some of these guys are good friends. It's just not fair to your amp tech or the other people that have been waiting in the queue for a long period of time. Another thing, expect future issues out of your gear. And you're probably saying, what the heck do you mean, Mark? If you took it to your amp tech and they fixed it, why should I expect future issues? Well, here's why, okay? 9 times out of 10, when someone takes something to a tech, right, the tech will ask them, do you want it fixed or do you want a full restoration of this unit? Maybe they don't ask that question. And if they don't ask that question, the implied is, I'm just going to fix what's broken right now. Maybe you got a leaky power supply capacitor and it's causing some hums. So they fix that, okay? You take the unit home, you play it for 4 months, and all of a sudden you've got some high-pitched squeal coming through it. And you're like, well, what's this coming from? Let me take it back to the amp tech. And back you go to your tech and you say, hey, that repair job you did a couple months ago, well, it's not working now, and I kind of need you to repair it for me, okay? Implied that you're going to repair it for free because whatever they fixed the last time has came undone or whatnot. I'll give you an analogy. It's the same as if you took your car to the mechanic to get your tires changed, or you had a flat tire and he fixed your flat tire. And 4 months later, right, your alternator dies, okay? Those 2 things had absolutely nothing to do with each other. And the thing they fixed the first time, the tire, and what you paid to cover that, did not cover a full restoration of this unit, nor did it cover, repairing your alternator. 2 different issues. These things are getting old, okay? 40, 50, 60 years old in a lot of cases, right? And you're going in and saying, I just want to get it working, and I'm wanting to spend like $100 or less on it or whatever. And maybe they fix a thing or two, a bad resistor and a bad capacitor. Don't think that's a full restoration, and don't think you won't have other problems down the road. If you want your unit to last you another 30, 40, 50 years and not have issues along the way, cough up the dough and pay for a full restoration up front. The piecemeal thing, you're only getting fixed what you're paying for at the time. Don't expect more out of that down the road. Okay, another thing I'll warn you about with the amp tech, if they tell you it's going to be $60 to get something repaired, and then they call you up after they have it done, they give you a quote, They call you up after they have it done and they say, hey, it wasn't $60, it was $120. Don't get bent out of shape. Now, let me tell you why. When I went through school, there was civil engineering, there was mechanical engineering, and there was electrical engineering, right? All went to the same physics classes, all the same math classes, but then how we applied them was different. I always thought, and this is just maybe biased on my part, that civil and mechanical were easier to grasp and understand because you could actually see something physically moving. Civil, you could see the lay of the land. Mechanical, you could see the gears turning, right? You could visualize. You can sit there and look at a circuit board all day long with electronics. You can't watch the electrons moving around. So my point is, until you get in there and start fixing something, maybe you fix this capacitor, this resistor that you knew were bad. Well, once you fix that, all of a sudden something else over here is out of whack and you've got to go address it as well. That stuff happens with electronics. You know, the alternative is the amp tech could just give you a super high quote and maybe scare you off, and maybe it's not that much. But that's just something to be aware of. All right, another scenario I see play out a little bit with amp techs is, and maybe it's taking advantage, maybe it's not, but it could play out that way. So you're repairing a piece of gear for somebody, and then that individual, you call them up and you say, okay, I've got your piece of gear done. It's going to be $100. And they say, okay, I'll come get it. And they'll say, hey, and by the way, I picked up this turntable the other day. I was looking at them on eBay, and they're like $300 or so. But this one, it seems it needs a little bit of work too. Would you take it on trade towards that $100? So the bartering system, I see it a lot in this industry. People want to get work done for free, and so they try to trade one piece of gear for getting work done and whatnot. Sometimes the technician is fine with that. Maybe it's something they've been looking for, right? I've done plenty of that myself. I've always said I'll trade work for gear. I say that because I have a day job that pays all my bills, and I'm not living off of this amp tech stuff. Your amp tech may need the cold hard cash to pay their bills, to pay their rent, to keep their shop open. So don't always assume you can barter this stuff out. Some people are fine with it. Others might try to be a nice person and maybe do some of it, but the reality they'd rather have the cold hard cash. So be upfront with them. Ask them that. Say, hey, would you rather me pay you cash for this? I've also got something I wouldn't mind talking to you about trade, but I'm perfectly fine with paying you cash if that's what you'd rather have. Give them that option. All right, another scenario that happens out there a lot, I've only ran into it a few times, but I have heard of it happening a lot, and that is people drop off something, they get it repaired, they get the bill, $200, $220, whatever, and then they go radio silent. They either don't have the money to get it repaired, or they've decided they don't want to put that much into the piece of gear, and they just kind of go radio silent, and the amp tech's left holding this gear. I've got one piece of gear here that I've had for a while, and I'm just assuming at this point the individual doesn't want it, because I've shot them lots of emails and left a couple voicemails, and I've gotten no response back beyond the initial, hey, I'm going to have to raise the money to fund that. So I don't know. I'm still considering the piece of gear theirs, but a lot of shops, if I was in business, this was a real business I did, I'd have a sign on the wall, anything not picked up in 90 or 120 days or whatever, you have forfeited, because the amp tech has shelled out. If something's a $220 repair, probably $100 of that or more is parts that amp tech, used their credit card, ordered online, paid for those parts, then used their time and labor, put it into the gear, and they're out all that. It's kind of held captive at this point. So just take that into consideration. If you kind of abuse your amp tech from that standpoint, they may not want to be your amp tech in the future. Here's another interesting one. Don't dump all the Goodwill junk onto your amp tech. I used to have this guy, he would bring me tape decks. He would bring me one, and I would try to get it going for him. He didn't want to put a lot of money into them. And then the next thing I know, I would get it fixed, and I would, I'd say, okay, come get your gear. And he would bring like 4 or 5 other tape decks to me, and he would say, I'll tell you what, fix these others, and maybe if you get one of them working, take it on trade. There again, trying to barter. Didn't want to actually spend any money. But what I came to realize over time, this guy was just scouring Goodwills around here and picking up stuff for $2 and $3, $5, and then hoping that it turned out to be a $30 repair and they could flip it on eBay for $200 or something. Don't do that to your amp tech. All right, so I've been telling you all these things not to do to your amp tech. Let me tell you how to actually treat your amp tech. First and foremost, make friends with your amp tech. Don't look at it as a one-way street. I'll tell you, when I do take in gear, even though I've closed my shop, the gear I take in are from friends that have done favors for me. I've got one buddy, he's out there scouring all the time. If he runs across something that's maybe a lot of tubes or some transformers or something, he'll bring them over and say, "Hey man, are you interested in this stuff?" Or, "Hey, I know where this big lot of tubes is at. I could put you on to." He helps me out. I would bend over backwards and do anything for this individual, and I've got others like that. So my wife's the same way. Anytime we've got a new dentist or a doctor or whatever, she just on a random basis every couple months she'll take by donuts. She'll maybe bake a cake for them, drop them off. But boy, when my wife needs an appointment for something, she gets it. She makes friends with these people. Build up equity with these individuals. Don't make it, like I said, don't make it a one-way street. Do some things for them, help them out some, they will help you out some. Ultimately, at the end of the day, don't make this about a financial transaction at the end of the day. Make it about a long-term partnership with each other where you're going to help your amp tech out where you can. Maybe you found some gear, maybe they could restore and you put them onto it. And then when they go to repair your gear, if the hours get crazy, they're not going to charge you all those hours. They're going to be nice to you and cut you a break. It's a two-way street. Look to make a relationship with your amp tech. It will serve you in the long run, and both of you will be happy to begin with. If you treat this like purely a business and a financial transaction, it may or may not last for the long term, and both of you may not be as satisfied as you possibly could be. All right, I wish you luck in finding a good amp tech. Hopefully you use some of these tips to keep your good amp tech, build a relationship with them, and thanks again for watching, everybody.